Mm. You know, it's funny. The older I got, the less I cared about people reading my statistics back to me. 7 championships, 10 straight title games. I have heard all of that for years. It is nice, I suppose, but those numbers never take me anywhere. My mind always goes somewhere else. I can still see the locker room. I can still hear Coach Paul Brown talking before we walked onto the field. I remember looking across the huddle at Marion Motley, then over at Dante Lavelli, and thinking, well, we got another 60 minutes to figure this thing out. That's what stayed with me. Not the headlines, not the trophies, just football. And the men who made me love coming to work every Sunday, when people ask me which 5 players I admired the most, well, these are the names that always find their way back into my mind. The first player I have to talk about is Sammy Baugh. Sammy was already Sammy Baugh before most of us young quarterbacks knew what professional football was supposed to look like. I remember watching him and thinking, well, this fellow does just about everything. He could throw the football, he could punt it, and then he could turn around and play defense. That was the game then. Nobody walked onto the field believing one job was enough. But Sammy did all of those jobs better than most men could do one of them. And what impressed me was how natural he made it appear. I was different. I liked order. I liked knowing where every man was supposed to be and why he was supposed to be there. That came from Paul Brown, certainly, but it was also simply the way my mind worked. Sammy looked as though he could walk into confusion and somehow understand it before everybody else did. He did not play quarterback like a man following instructions from a sheet of paper. He played as though he could feel where the game was going. Now, I do not mean he was careless. People sometimes confuse instinct with carelessness. Sammy understood football. That was why he could improvise without losing control of what he was trying to accomplish. I admired that because it was not something anybody could teach me. I could study film. I could rehearse a play until every step felt automatic. But there are moments when a play breaks down, a defensive back moves where he was not expected to move, and the quarterback has about half a breath to make a decision. Sammy was comfortable in those moments. He played in Washington through 1952, so I had the opportunity to see him during those first NFL seasons after Cleveland came over from the All-America Conference. By then, he had already accomplished nearly everything a quarterback could accomplish, but he still carried himself like a football player, not some important fellow who happened to throw passes. I respected that. I never had much patience for a quarterback who wanted special treatment. The position already gave us enough attention. We did not need to ask for more. Sammy had played in an era when quarterbacks were hit, knocked down, and expected to get up without turning the whole afternoon into a complaint. Well, that suited my view of the job. You called the play, accepted the responsibility, and lived with the result. People later said I helped establish a standard for winning quarterbacks. Maybe, but long before anyone called me Automatic Otto, Sammy Baugh had shown all of us that a quarterback should understand the entire game, not merely the part that made him look good. The next player I want to talk about is Dante Lavelli. Dante and I arrived in Cleveland at the same time back in 1946 when none of us really knew what the Browns were going to become. Paul Brown knew, or at least he acted as though he knew. The rest of us were trying to learn the system, learn each other, and keep from making the same mistake twice. Dante made that easier for me. He was not the loudest fellow in the room. He did not have to tell everybody how good his hands were. You found that out the first time you put the ball somewhere it probably should not have gone, and he came down with it anyway. Quarterbacks remember those catches. We remember the perfect throws too naturally, but the catches that stay with you are the ones that save you from having to explain a poor decision when you get back to the sideline. Dante saved me from a few explanations. He had strong hands, tremendous concentration, and a way of adjusting to the football without making the whole thing appear dramatic. That mattered in our offense because Paul expected everything to happen on time. My feet had to be right. The receiver had to be where the play said he would be. But football rarely behaves exactly the way it is drawn on a board. A defender gets a hand on you. The protection gives way sooner than expected. The ball comes out a little high or a little behind. Dante understood how to finish the play after the plan had stopped being perfect. And there was trust between us. I do not mean the sort of trust people talk about after one big game. I mean the trust that develops after years of practice, after throwing the same route in cold weather until neither man has to think about it anymore. By the time we played the Rams for the NFL championship in 1950, Dante and I had already been through 4 championship seasons together in the All-America Conference. People still wondered whether Cleveland belonged with the established NFL teams. We heard it. We did not need to discuss it very much. We simply understood what that game meant. Dante caught 11 passes that afternoon. 11. In a championship game decided 30-28. Well, there is not much more a quarterback can ask from a receiver. When the field became crowded and the pressure tightened, he kept finding room, and when I put the ball near him, he finished the job. People called him Glue Fingers, and that was a pretty good name, but I admired more than his hands. I admired his dependability. Dante never made the game about Dante. He came to work, ran his routes, took the hits, and was ready when I needed him. A quarterback receives a great deal of credit for throwing the football. The older I became, the more I understood how much of that credit really belonged to the man who made sure the pass had a proper ending. The next player I want to talk about is Lou Groza. Well, most people remember Lou because of the kicking, and naturally they should. He won games with that right foot. But when I think about Lou, I do not see a fella standing by himself, waiting to kick. I see an offensive tackle. I see a man spending most of the afternoon with his hands on a defensive lineman trying to keep that fellow away from me. Then when the game tightened up and everybody became quiet, Lou would step back and kick the ball. That always impressed me. Today, people think of those as 2 completely different jobs. For Lou, they were simply part of the same Sunday. He protected the quarterback, blocked for Marion Motley, and then accepted the responsibility for the final points. That takes a particular kind of mind. You cannot carry the last mistake with you. You cannot think about the man who just drove his shoulder into your chest. You have to become calm very quickly. Lou could do that. I remember the 1,950 championship game against the Rams as clearly as any game I played. It was our first season in the NFL, and there were still people waiting for us to fail. They believed the Browns had looked good only because we came from the All-America Conference. We heard that often enough. The Rams had a powerful offense, and the game moved back and forth all afternoon. Late in the fourth quarter, we were behind 28-27. We got the ball back and moved down the field. But once we reached kicking range, my part was finished. That is a strange feeling for a quarterback. You spend the whole game believing every decision belongs to you, and then suddenly you stand on the sideline and watch another man decide whether the season ends with a championship. Lou walked onto the field with less than a minute remaining. I do not remember him looking nervous. Lou rarely gave you much to read. He lined up, made the kick from 16 yards, and we won 30-28. Everybody remembers the ball going through the uprights. What I remember is the way he approached it. No show, no speech, no attempt to make the moment larger than it already was. He simply did his job. That was Lou. He could handle the dirty work for 59 minutes and still be ready when the cleanest, most visible play of the game belonged to him. I admired that because football has many men who want responsibility when success is likely. Lou accepted it when failure would have followed him for years, and he understood something important. A championship is not always won by the man holding the ball. Sometimes it belongs to the man who has been blocking all afternoon, then takes 3 steps back and sends it between the uprights. The next player I want to talk about is Bobby Layne. Bobby and I were about as different as 2 quarterbacks could be, and maybe that is exactly why I respected him so much. If you watched us play, you probably would not have guessed we were playing the same position. I liked structure. I believe preparation solved most problems before kickoff. Paul Brown expected us to know every situation before it happened, and I was comfortable with that. Bobby looked as though he enjoyed solving problems after everything had already fallen apart. I used to watch him and think, I don't know how he keeps getting away with that. But somehow he did. There were quarterbacks who played carefully, and then there was Bobby Layne, who seemed perfectly willing to take a chance if he believed it could change the game. The funny thing is, those chances worked far more often than people remember. We crossed paths plenty during the early 1950s when Cleveland and Detroit were the 2 clubs everybody measured themselves against. If you wanted to win the NFL championship sooner or later, you were probably going to see Bobby Layne standing on the opposite sideline. I know I did. The 1,952 championship still bothers me a little even after all these years. Detroit beat us 17-7. We believed we were the better football team, but believing something and proving it are 2 different things. Bobby never gave us an easy afternoon. Then came the championship game in 1953. That one hurt even more because it was decided by a single point, 17-16. You replay games like that in your mind for a long time. I certainly did. You think about one throw, one block, one decision, one possession. Football has a way of reminding you how small the difference is between celebrating and sitting quietly in the locker room wondering what happened. Bobby understood pressure. That is what impressed me most. He never looked as though the score frightened him. If Detroit trailed, he behaved exactly the same way. If they were ahead, he still played aggressively. He had an unusual confidence that spread through the entire team. You could almost feel it from the other sideline. Well, quarterbacks notice those things. We spend enough time studying the man across from us that we eventually understand how he affects the players around him. Bobby made Detroit believe every game could still be won. Then came 1,954. We finally turned everything around and beat the Lions 56-10 for the championship. People sometimes ask whether that victory erased the frustration of the previous 2 years. No, not entirely, but it reminded me why competition matters. Bobby Layne forced Cleveland to become a better football team. He forced me to become a better quarterback. I never measured my career by the opponents I defeated easily. The ones I remembered were the men who refused to let me play comfortably. Bobby was certainly one of those men. You never relaxed when he was on the field because somehow he always found one more play hiding inside the game. And finally, the player I admired the most was Marion Motley. There are certain men you remember because of what they did with the football, and then there are men you remember because the whole game seemed different when they were on the field. Marion was that kind of player. People talk about his size, his power, the way he could run through a defender instead of around him, and all of that is true. But from where I stood, usually a few yards behind him, Marion was much more than a great runner. He was part of the reason our entire offense worked. When a defense had to worry about Marion coming downhill, everything changed. Linebackers stepped forward. Safeties looked into the backfield a little too long. Passing lanes opened. A good play fake became more than a trick because the defense had already learned what happened when Marion carried the ball. A quarterback appreciates that. Some of my best throws began with 11 men believing Marion Motley was about to run straight through them. And then there was the blocking. People do not always remember that part because blocking does not appear in the newspaper the same way rushing yards do. I remember it. A quarterback always remembers the man who saw a defender coming and decided that defender would not reach him. Marion could hit a man with the same force he used when carrying the football. He did not complain about it. He did not ask whether the play was designed to make him look good. He understood what the team needed. That meant a great deal to me. We joined the Browns in 1946, and by 1948 we completed a 15-0 season. People look back now and see all those victories and assume everything came easily. It did not. We worked under Paul Brown, and Paul had a way of making every practice feel as though somebody's job depended on the next mistake. Marion handled that pressure. He handled defensive lines built to stop him, and he handled things away from the ball that I never had to handle. I want to be careful about that because I cannot pretend I knew exactly what it felt like to be Marion Motley in those years. I did not. He was one of the black players helping break the color barrier in professional football, and he dealt with treatment that white players on our team did not face. I saw enough to understand that. I saw men try to provoke him. I saw him take punishment that had nothing to do with the play. I saw him return to the huddle and continue doing his job. He did not make speeches about courage. He showed it. That stayed with me. Football courage is not only standing in front of a charging linebacker. Sometimes it is walking into a place where people have already decided they do not want you there, then performing so well they cannot deny what they are seeing. Marion did that over and over again. Well, when people talk about my years in Cleveland, they often put the quarterback in the middle of the picture. That is how football history usually works. But I knew what was happening in front of me. I knew who made those play fakes believable. I knew who carried defenders, picked up blitzes, and gave our team a physical identity. More importantly, I knew the kind of man doing it. So if you ask me which player I admired most, I do not have to think very long. It was Marion Motley. He had the talent, certainly, but he also had strength that cannot be measured by yards, touchdowns, or championships. And I was lucky enough to stand behind him and see it up close. Well, those are the five. Sammy, Baugh, Dante, Lavelli, Groza, Bobby Layne, and Marion Motley. I suppose somebody could look at that list and argue with the order. That is fine. Football people have been arguing about players for as long as I can remember. But I did not choose these men because of a chart or because somebody handed me a page of statistics. I chose them because I saw what they did when the game became difficult. Sammy showed me how complete a quarterback could be. Dante gave me the kind of trust every passer hopes to find. Lou proved that a man could do the hard, unnoticed work all afternoon and still remain calm when the entire season came down to one kick. Bobby reminded me that the right opponent can make you better even when you would rather never see him again. And Marion, well, Marion showed me more than football. People still mention the championships when they talk about my career. 7 titles, 10 championship games. Those are good memories, certainly. But I never walked off a field believing I had done it alone. No quarterback ever has. I was protected by good men, helped by good men, and challenged by good men. I was fortunate. That is probably the simplest way to say it. I played during a hard time with remarkable football players, and I learned something from every one of them. These 5 just stayed with me a little longer.